In this video, we're going to go over the installation process of the 370Z side splitters. They're available from Skillard.com in raw aluminum and black powder coat. Please email sales@skillard.com if you have any questions. Now let's go ahead and get started and take a look at getting these side splitters on. Okay, so we've got the car up in the air. There's a couple prep things that we need to do. You could do this with jack stands laying on the ground, but obviously if you have access to a lift, it's going to be easier. These might be familiar. If you still have these on your car, they're, which side is this? I think it's this side. So these guys are mounted up under here. So there's just little clips, pull them in, a couple screws back here. So pop those off so we can get those out of the way. Then we've got these guys in the back. So basically these go on, mount like this, keep all the crap out of here. We'll want to take these off, and I guess you don't necessarily need to put them back on, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this off and then trim off this lip and put it back in, so that way the side splitter will sit right underneath it and it'll close this back in so I'm not throwing debris in there. We can look over on this side, and I already did this one, so it's not attached yet, but basically pop this off. I've already trimmed the leg and trimmed this down, so that way I can pop this back in place and not have it interfere with the side splitter when we mount it, but also it seals that back up. So then I'm going to go ahead now, I'm going to grab the side splitters and kind of position them into place. All right, so here I've got the passenger side, and one of the things that is kind of unique about these is one, how thick they are, but two is that we form this offset in here. And so most side splitters like this, pretty flimsy, but once we've added this bend, it's made it extremely rigid. It also drops it down a little lower to the ground, so it's going to have a better look and performance to it. You'll see this cut out here, and that's for those of you that are putting these on a lift like we are, because you've got your rear lift point here, and we don't want to make it so that way this was in the way and you couldn't actually do it on a lift. So I'm going to go ahead and put this over our arms. Oh, and one thing to note too is that the inside mounting piece here is high, and then the offset drops down. So I'm going to go ahead and slide this into position here, and if you're doing this on the ground, you'll want a second set of hands to help you out. But if you're doing it on a lift like this, it's nice because it essentially helps hold it up for you. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the driver's side, get that one put into place, and then we're going to go ahead and start going over the hardware, where it goes, how it mounts, what things we need to do to get it on. We're going to do one side. We won't show you on the video both sides because they're a mirror of each other. So whatever you do on the passenger side, same as the driver, same as passenger. So I'm going to get the driver's side on, and then we'll get going on the hardware and how we mount it. All right, so I kind of want to touch on some of the hardware before we actually start installing it. So there's multiple sizes and lengths. These M6 machine screws we're going to be using with different variety of spacers. These are M6 by 50, I believe. Then we have the Allen head, which are an M6 by 70, so we just need two that are a little bit longer. We also have these 2-inch long number 12 screws that are going in the plastic retainer clips, and then we have a few that are 2.5 by 14, and part of the reason they're 14 is I just felt like when you were installing the number 12s, they just didn't have enough bite on the ends, and I wanted it to be a little more secure. And since they're just going into the plastic retainer, they'll just thread right in. Most of the holding force is going to be on the machine hardware, though, that is into the metal on the car. We also have a couple U-nuts that we're going to be sliding on. We have a couple M6 screws that have the washers already in them. And we also have 2 M6 riv nuts. We have supplementary riv nut videos. You probably don't need to have these, but I just wanted to ensure that the front edge was secure. And, you know, if I was grabbing on it, wanting to hang off of it, I felt like that was kind of a necessary addition. And then we have a pile of 1/2-inch aluminum spacers, and then we have quite a few fender washers. And those fender washers are going to be twofold. One, they go on the heads of the screws to distribute the load across when we install them. But then also, we're going to use some of them as additional shims and spacers as we go ahead and install this. And there are going to be extra washers in the kit. So that way, if you find that you want to add a washer or two to have it line up the way you want, then those are available. So don't be surprised if you get through and it's done and you have a few extras. So that just kind of highlights the hardware. We're going to go with some of these machine screws and spacers first to get our position located, and then we'll go on to the next step. So back here, there's one of those U-clips that I had mentioned, and I've already put it on this car. So basically, I need to align it to a hole in the side splitter, and so this can be installed after the side splitter is mounted, because this hole right here is the hole that we're going to be lining that up. So once that's there, you'll just need to grab a drill bit that's slightly smaller than this hole, and you can run the drill inside here, in through the plastic, and then you can slide that clip on and in place. But we're also, as I had mentioned, there was that M6 riv nut that is getting installed up in the front. And in order to locate that, the easiest thing to do is to get a couple screws into the side splitter so it's located where it's going to ultimately mount, and then you'll be able to run a drill bit up through here and mark where you need it. And so right here you can see I've already installed this M6 riv nut. Again, this is optional, but just felt like it was something that I wanted to have on ours to make sure that there was no chance of this having any wobble or any deflection up in the front end. So, and again, we have our video, supplemental video that shows you about riv nuts, riv nut tool, installation. Also, when you're drilling the hole, this is an M6, you want a drill bit that's a couple thousandths over the diameter of the riv nut, so you can get that in without it being too big or too small. I believe it's 0.4, but double check, because sometimes there are variances in the riv nut thickness. So that just kind of lines that out, and I'll show you some of the first screws we'll put in to get it aligned. Okay, so I'm going to take, in this guy right here, which you can kind of see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. These are OEM threaded holes that go into the metal. And so I'm going to take one of my machine screws, which is the M6x50, put a washer on it, and then I'm going to go ahead and put 3 washers here as a spacer, and then 2 of our 1/2-inch aluminum spacers. And because you're inside here, you know, we can tilt these out. These are pretty easy to get to. Then I'm going to lift it into position, line it up, just get it snugged in there. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a single washer on the head of this, use 3 spacers, and get this one positioned. And once I've got that in position and made sure that it's aligned, that's when I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drill this hole and then mark this hole. You could drill it, but you're going to have to ultimately pull these screws back out to just ever so, or at least this front one, to shift it so that way you can get the riv nut tool in, pop that in. So now that that's in there, you'll slide that back. Then I'm going to go through and put the rest of these screws back in, and I'm going to tell you what I found was optimal for the amount of spacers and washers that we're going to put in here. All right, so we're working our way down, getting the M6 machine screws in with the spacers. This is all still nice and loose, so that way as I put these in, pretty easy to actually angle the screw to get your washers on, get your spacers on, and then go ahead and move it, position it, get it started in the hole. See how I have the flexibility to move it. So one thing to mention too is you can see all of these holes plus these out here are slotted, so you do have the ability to move this forward and back. The only holes that aren't slotted are the ones where you're drilling for your U-nut and your riv nut up in the front, but all the holes that match up with the OEM mounting points are slotted, so there is some adjustability there. So these 4 machine screws here, talking about the spacing, they all have a washer on the bottom, but then this forward one has 3 spacers, and then when I came back I have 4 washers, 2 spacers on the top, and then 3 washers, 2 spacers, 3 washers, 2 spacers. And what we found is that's a good fit to keep it nice and even and flat. Like I said, you might find that you want to maybe adjust that, adjust the pitch or the angle of how this is fitted up, so you can put more or less washers and spacers on there as you see fit. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come forward, and this front hole right here, where I've already drilled and installed that M6 riv nut, I'm going to go ahead and get that, which we talked about in our hardware kit, was that M6 by 70 with the Allen head. I'm going to put a washer on it, and then in this spot, what we found worked pretty well was 4 of the aluminum spacers. So, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4. Go ahead and get that lined up, started by hand. And now I've got all of our spacers in that we're gonna, well, I take that back, all of them on this side that we're gonna put in. There's gonna be 1 additional spacer that we're gonna put in the back on the outside. So we'll actually go do that one next. Okay, so now we've moved to the outside rear, and up here is where we've already drilled the hole in the plastic and put our U-nut right here, and that's just to give it a little extra rigidity on this outside edge. And because of our joggle that we've put in here, we're going to use one of these 1/2-inch spacers. We're using one of the M6 by 50. It's a little longer than we need it, but there's nothing on the top side to interfere. So I'm going to slide that in with that single spacer and go ahead and get it threaded into that U-nut that we have. And again, none of these are tight. I'm just getting them all started in position, and then once we have the rest of the hardware in, we'll go through the process of tightening it all down. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start grabbing those number 12 and number 14 screws and start putting those in. All right, so we're back into the front. I said we were going to do the 12 and 14 screws next, but we actually have that M6 screw with the washer that's in it. And up here, where this slotted hole is, there's actually a factory threaded insert, and it's got like a little floating nut in there. So we're just going to line that up get that started. Then we're going to go to the number 14 and number 12 screws. Like I said, the number 14s are 2.5 inches. I'm going to put, this is the number 14, and I'm going to put this in and get it started right here. This is going into, you know, that factory plastic. So not necessarily, you know, the thing that's holding this up. Most of what's holding this up is the rigidity in the forming, as well as all the machine screws that are secured in the back here. So anyway, that 2.5 inch long by number 14 is going to go here. You're just barely going to be able to get this started, and then you'll need you know, a ratchet or a nut driver to get it the rest of the way in, because it's being threaded into that plastic clip inserts that are up there. The other number 14 by 2.5 inches is going to go on the opposite end, and this one you fish up in there to line up again with the factory hole. And let's see, I gotta find it. There we go. Just had to get the right angle. Then we've got the number 12 by 2 inch. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4 across the center. And then we're going to go ahead and get that aligned with the factory plastic inserts. Just get them started, because you're not really going to be able to thread these in by hand, because since they're going to those plastic inserts, you'll run into some resistance. One thing to note as you go through to tighten these, the ones that are the number 14 and the number 12 screws, you don't need to get carried away with really cranking them down. You just want to make them snug, because again, they're in those plastic inserts. And so you have all the machine screws that are in metal, which you can get those nice and tight. But then if you just keep cranking on these, you'll actually start to crush the plastic and potentially rip those inserts out. So that's just something to be aware of. I like to, you could do it either way. You could tighten the machine screws first, or you could tighten the number 12 and number 14 screws. But one of the things that I like to do is just kind of get them, you know, from loose to snug, and then just as it's going, do all of them a little bit and get it snugged down. So I'm going to go ahead and get all this tightened up, and then we'll take a look at it when it's all tightened in. Okay, so we've got it all tightened up and snugged in. This outside edge, it's hard to see from being underneath it, but we're able to get this outside edge nice and straight. If we felt like we needed to make some adjustments, we could loosen and adjust the spacers, but we feel pretty good about this, and it's a lot easier to keep it straight with this offset in here, whereas if it was just flat, it would bow when you installed it, like a lot of other options that are out there are. Again, this now drops it closer to the ground, gives it a better look, and then also, obviously it would be hard to see with your car on the ground, but if you're off to the side and you're looking like straight at it, this also does a great job at hiding all the hardware. So that way it just looks like a nice smooth edge underneath there. And yeah, so nice and secure. Lift myself up by that thing, all 200 plus pounds of me. But yeah, these are available from Skillard.com. These are obviously powder coated black. There'll be a raw aluminum version that you can leave raw. If you leave them raw, we suggest like you put a clear coat on them so that way they don't oxidize. Or if you were going to paint them a different color yourself, then that's an option as well. I'm going to go ahead now and just do basically the exact same thing we did here, but mirrored, and install the driver's side. And again, these are available from Skillard.com. And if you have any questions, please email sales@skillard.com.